the pain of regret is almost always worse than the pain of trying. So what I mean is that for me, not doing something and then regretting it hurts way more than if I try something and I fail.
What if the protein bar in your bag wasn't just a snack, but fuel for resilience, clarity, and performance? My guest today knows exactly what it takes to turn that idea into reality. James Oliver is the founder and CEO of Atlas Bar, a company redefining what clean and effective nutrition looks like. From experimenting in his mom's kitchen during college to getting Atlas bars on the shelves of over 1,000 stores nationwide. James has built a brand around curiosity, discipline, and personal growth. His journey is about more than nutrition. It's about endurance, mindset, and building a life and business that help people perform at their best. Get ready to be inspired by the story behind Atlas and the lesson James learned along the way. Welcome, James.
Thank you for having me. That was quite an introduction. Maybe the best one that I've ever gotten, and hopefully I can live up to it. Thank you.
You sure can, because I know what it takes to build a company from the ground up, and even one that goes directly to the consumer with a new product, especially in this very competitive market and energy bars. But before we go there, uh, I just want to get to know you a little bit and our audience get to know you a little bit better. So you reside where? And what was the idea behind even starting Atlas?
I grew up in the Northeast in the US, so I'm from the Boston area. I live in New York City now, so still in the Northeast, but different city. And the reason I started Atlas was because ever since I was a little kid, I had a fascination with nutrition and the idea that what you consume and what you choose to consume can really alter what your body is capable of doing. And really the first like one of the first memories I have of this is when my parents they told me, I think I was like 4 years old at the time, but they told me that eating carrots can help increase your eyesight. And so I ate like an entire bag of carrots because I was like, I want to have supervision. And obviously that's not quite how it works, but that was kind of, it planted a seed in me that, oh, it's cool that by choosing to eat this thing versus this thing, it will actually change what my body is able to do. And I really like that. And so as I got more into nutrition and wellness and started to push my body harder, I did some like ultra endurance things. And if you're doing that type of stuff, you have to be a bit more dialed in terms of what you're consuming. So I taught myself a lot about nutrition, and I was just trying to figure things out. Like I remember when I was in high school, I think, and I remember being confused because at that time there was this whole narrative that fat was bad, but on the other hand, like vegetables and fruits are good. And then I remember thinking like, well, where does an avocado sit then? Because an avocado is technically a fruit and it's also filled with fat. So is it good or is it bad? And I just couldn't get to like an answer on it. And there just seemed to be so much confusion. At the time, eggs were also considered bad, and now eggs are considered good. And there's just so much like complexity and there are so few like answers that I just kind of looked at it as like a kind of like an intellectual challenge. And I was like, I want to better understand what is happening here. So I threw myself into it and just studied for years. And I eventually, when I was in school, I was studying Mandarin Chinese. And as part of that study, I went over to China, lived with a homestay family there for 5, 6 months. And I knew going over there that I was going to have a very different diet than what I was used to in the States. In particular, I thought that my protein intake was going to be a bit lower because I knew that it was going to be more like rice and dumpling based, which it definitely was. And so I was trying to think like, well, I want to stay like somewhat on track. I don't just want to completely fall off the rails of everything that I've been working on from a health perspective. And I was looking for something that was shelf stable, that was something that I could eat every day, that had solid ingredients, that had good nutrition. And there's just nothing that fit the bill. So I wasn't like, I want to start a bar company. It just kind of was the natural solution to what I was looking for. And there was nothing that had great ingredients and great nutrition and would taste good. So I made a couple hundred of them with my mom at the time and brought them over with me, had them when I was there. I came back a couple months later and I was like, I think there actually might be a spot for the thing that we made. So I spent a couple months pulling it all together and then started selling them not too long after.
Wow, that was a lot of information. And
Yes.
I just want to unpack that a little bit. Starting with when you were 4 years old, listening to the influence of your parents. And that is, I think, a very important lesson for everybody who's listening, who is a parent right now. The power that you have over your child's future. And especially in the time that we're living, where, of course, obesity is one of the major challenges that we're facing today. And it all begins from what I've learned too, is how, as a child, you're being taught and what you're being fed, because at the end, the parents have the control over that while you're still young in that younger stage. So that's one thing. So I applaud your parents to give you that great start. But then the other thing that I want to unpack is your curiosity. And I think if you're staying curious in life and looking for answers, that will guide you naturally in the right direction, like it did for you. You were just curious about that. So tell us more, first of all. Then you went to China. Tell us a little bit about your China
Mhm.
experience.
Yeah, it was probably the best decision that I ever made. I was between going to actually Australia and China. I'm sure Australia would have been great, but it just wouldn't have challenged me in the same way that going to China did. And I didn't have a lot. I think I had at this point 3 semesters of Chinese under my belt, which is not a lot. It's like a year and a half of study. And I was going to live with a family who spoke zero English. They did not speak a single word of English. So when you're in that situation, you have to speak the language. Like you have to speak the language just to even communicate about like eating. I remember when they first picked me up and they were trying to figure out what to feed me. And my Chinese mom, she turned around and was like, pizza. And I realized after a few times that she was saying pizza, but she was basically asking if I would eat pizza, as if I was like, it was almost as if I was like a dog they had picked up from like the shelter and were trying to figure out like what could be fed to it. So it was a really cool experience, just completely outside of my comfort zone. Extremely intimidating to go over there. And yeah, I had the feeling when I got to the Shanghai airport. I remember getting off the plane and I couldn't like read any of the signs, and I was like, "What have I done? Like, what am I doing?" Um, and so yeah, it's extremely uncomfortable, but I think putting yourself in those uncomfortable situations and realizing that you can handle it and that you have a pretty high capacity for dealing with discomfort, it helps you realize that you can do a lot more than you otherwise think you can. So it was an awesome experience, and I would do it again in a heartbeat.
I can only imagine how that must felt to be in such a foreign country, not something like you would go to Canada or something like that, but it's so far out of the comfort zone, as you said. But wouldn't you say that that experience prepared you for all the things that were about to come, but with starting a business?
Yeah, definitely. I think that probably the most important skill that it helps you with is problem solving in an uncertain environment, because like there were a number of times where I was like, okay, I don't really know where I am. I can't really speak to anybody because I can't speak fluently. I need to figure out how to get from here to here. And you're completely reliant upon yourself, because at the time, I don't even think I didn't have like a cell plan. So I didn't have access to like the internet. So like I was truly on my own. And yeah, you have to problem solve with a very foreign environment, and things are changing. And that's very similar to what you have to do in a business, where you have to problem solve and you have to figure things out And oftentimes it's under pressure and under stress, just like if you're in a foreign environment like that. So I think that was probably one of the most useful skills that it helped me just work on building that muscle.
Yeah, and I can only second that because as a communication and confidence coach, this is oftentimes what I invite my clients to do is getting themselves in that uncomfortable situation and just make sure to go through that fear because on the other side of fear is always success, no matter how it looks like, right? So I think it's a very important skill to have. Now, okay, so you came back from your China travel and you had the bars that you created so that you have enough protein. So, what sparked you to start a business around that?
So I was 22 or 21 or 22 at the time, and I knew that I wanted to do something that was difficult. I just gravitate towards that. When I first went to university, the language that I first decided to take was Arabic. And the reason I chose it was because it was just the most difficult language that they offered to me. And I just wanted to see if I could learn it. I did that for 2 semesters and then I switched to Mandarin after that. So it was similar with this, where I was like, I want to try to do something difficult. And I think starting a business would be difficult. And I think that out of all the options I have available to myself right now as a 21, 22 year old, even if I try this and I fail, I still will probably learn more than if I go into just a more traditional pathway. And yeah, it's scary. It's when all of my classmates are going into kind of like well trodden paths or going to jobs that sound like secure and like impressive. And I'm just doing this. I'm just at the time I was driving Uber and selling bars. You're just like, what am I doing? So yeah, I wanted it for a couple of different reasons. One, because I wanted to do something really challenging and I wanted to see if I could figure it out. I also had the idea that I knew I did well in school, but I knew that I wasn't that's not where I, in a kind of really structured environment, is not where I did the best. I knew that I was very good at figuring things out in a kind of unstructured way. And I thought that a business would be a good place for me to kind of express that. And I also I wanted to have autonomy. I wanted to have kind of freedom over my own schedule. That was really important to me. And I was comfortable with working for myself. And even if it meant making way less, I would rather work for myself and make way less than work for a company where I need to ask permission to like go out during the day and make
Yeah.
more money. My freedom is more important to me.
And I'm so glad that you mentioned that because it is different for everybody. Some need that security. It depends on the human needs. You know, there are the six basic human needs, or five or six, depends on who are you following. But Tony Robbins, mentioned the six human needs, and some of them, the basic are security, and then for others is variety, and those things where we thrive. And for you it is definitely that freedom that you want to have, which for others is not important. And you rather say, hey, I don't care about the money. And that's oftentimes what I refer to. When you do something you love and you're passionate about and you learn the skills and work for it, the money will follow. And obviously it was for you. So how did your parents react when you said, I'm done with college, but I'm not going to do that traditional route. I wanted to start my own business. Were they supportive when you told them you want to start your own company?
I don't even know if I kind of told them or asked them. I had already started it by the time that I had graduated from school. So I had been working on it in my last year of school, so that by the time that I graduated, I actually had the product ready to go and started to sell. But it wasn't for me, it wasn't a huge decision. I put a lot of thought into it. And I remember somebody saying to me, like, wow, that's pretty risky. You started your own business. And initially I only used like five to $10,000 of money that I had saved to start it. So it wasn't like a huge investment. And I figured this is the best time. I'm 22 years old and I don't have a mortgage. I don't have a family. I don't have all of these obligations. So this is
Mhm.
actually the least risky time for me to
Yeah.
start something like this, because the risk is only going to get harder to do the older I get. And as scary as it is right now, I have the fewest reasons to not to not do it right now. And my parents, they knew that I was a hard worker, and I was very, at that time, it's like too, like I was studying for, I took the MBA exam for graduate school. In my last year, I did an Ironman. I was training for I was training for all these events. I was very like they knew that I wasn't doing this to like slack. They're like, okay, if he's going to do this, he's probably going to do this pretty hard. So they didn't honestly give a lot of resistance, which I hadn't really ever thought about before. But I guess the absence of their resistance is why I didn't think about it.
Right,
So yeah,
exactly.
there's
Yeah, yeah. I had to go through it a little bit differently. Uh, there was no resistance, when I changed careers because I was in an office and that was not me, and I wanted to start my career as an actress. So that was a decision that I made. And of course, they were like, "Ah, I don't know if it's a good idea," all this kind of stuff. But eventually, I did what I felt was right for me, which you obviously did too. So tell us about um, a couple challenges that you had, because I'm sure it wasn't easy at the beginning. And in this podcast, I often talk about those adversities that come our way, those challenging times, and how we can get through it. And when we get through, we get stronger in the process and become sometimes our next best self. Can you share an experience or maybe an event that was, challenging for you, and how did you get through?
yeah. There's honestly too many to count. The number of mistakes that I made and the number of just challenges and obstacles that I've faced are more than I would like. If I had known the number when I started, I don't know if I would have started. So I think my naivete kind of protected me a little
Yep.
bit because
Yep.
you don't know how difficult. And I think that's helpful in a sense.
Yes.
Like you might not start a marathon if you know how like hard it's actually going to be, but then when you're already partway through it, you're like, all right, well, I've already started this. Now I got to finish it.
Hmm.
So I think it was helpful that I didn't fully understand the weight of what I was taking on. But yeah, I'll give you one early on example, which was I had this is about a year, maybe 2 years in, and the company was growing really quickly. We had grown maybe like in less than a year, the sales had grown like X,
Wow.
so really quickly. And I had just made a fatal error. It didn't kill the company because I didn't really have any costs at that time. So there was no money really coming out of the company, but I had tried to change manufacturers, and because I just mistimed it, the we basically went out as we were kind of growing exponentially. We basically went out of stock for 3 months, so we went to zero. We from
Wow.
going from like 10x sales, kind of skate ramp, as a lot would call it. We just went from that to zero for 3 months, and that was very hard to deal with because I'm just sitting there twiddling my thumbs, kicking myself for 3 months every day, being like, "What can I do?" while I wait for a new product to be made. And I did not make that mistake again. But I spent that time, I think I spent most of that time just reading and trying to, I was like, okay, well, I have this time. I may as well try and study and see what I can, like what gaps in my knowledge I can fill in the meantime while I just have this free time. So that's just one out of, I'm sure, hundreds of examples of, most of them are self-inflicted like that, where I just made a
Mhm.
mistake.
But this is how we learn along
Yeah.
the way. Every mistakes, every failure, I call it failing forward, because what we do is we learn from it and we're not going to make that mistake again for sure. I
Yes.
have several of those, but it's part of our growth. So, do you have a vision? Where do you see your company going? If you could have a magic wand, this is the ideal vision.
Yeah, it's a good question. I've been thinking more about that recently. I think it's clear to me that the way that the current, definitely in the U.S., the way that the current food system is set up is not working. We have increasing, despite having the most advanced medicine in human history, we have just continuing climbing rates of chronic disease across. virtually every aspect of human biology, and a lot of that starts with the inputs that we're putting into our bodies. So I think that there's a lot that can be done on the food side of things to help people. It's not, I think there's kind of like a binary decision that's a little bit of a false one, where a lot of people have the perspective of like we need to return to kind of like growing our own food and all of that. And that would be great in an ideal world. But the reality is that that's probably not going to happen, where everyone is all of a sudden going to revert to that. So then you have to say, okay, well, what can we do within the existing system? How can we just create better food that does not cause all of these negative side effects that it seems that the current food does? So I think when I look at the future of the company, it's how can we, given the knowledge and the tools and the resources that we have as a company, how can we work to help solve some of those problems for people?
I think this is a fabulous vision because, as you said, we cannot continue this way. And eventually, I mean, there are a lot of companies who make corporations who make a lot of money by skipping or using less ingredients and cheaper ingredients that at the end makes us make. I think it's education, first of all. Education. Wouldn't you think when people know, they would act differently? Do you have any ideas, perhaps, or thoughts that could make that happen?
Yeah, I definitely have some thoughts, and I like you. I would like to think that it's really about education. I definitely think a lot of it is, but I think I unfortunately have reluctantly accepted that even if people know that something isn't good for them, that's not always enough to help them steer clear of that behavior. Like we all know that alcohol is not good for humans, but it's still hugely consumed. Same with sugar. It's still same with fast food. I'm sure McDonald's is still making tens of billions of dollars a year, and I don't think that anybody thinks that that's necessarily a healthy decision for them to make. So I think that the core problem to solve is how do you basically reduce friction for people to make choices that
Hmm.
are healthier, because right now the kind of default choice, the path of least resistance, is making unhealthy choices. Like if you go into any grocery store, the vast majority of the food in there is what I would define as not healthy. It's nutrient poor, calorically rich, and doesn't provide a lot of satiety. And so the four out of five choices for people in a grocery store are ones that are not the best for them. How do you, like in the same way that fast food made burgers and fries, it decreased the friction for people to get that. It just made it easier for people to
Yeah.
get. And so, how do you apply that same principle that's been used kind of against our health for people's health? And that's how I think about it. And how can we do this at a larger scale?
I like that. Reduce the friction because you're
Mm-hmm.
absolutely right. If I want to eat less junk food or sugar or drink less alcohol, I don't have it in my cabbie. I don't have it in, it's like it's
Yeah,
not there. Well, that's one thing. But then again, it's up to you to do that. But what you're saying is, okay, how can we reduce that? I mean, one thing is with cigarettes, for example. It was, if you think back 50 years ago, that was just very normal. But then they made it harder and harder. And then it was like you could not smoke in restaurants anymore. You could not smoke on the streets. When you buy cigarettes, they're not so available. They have to open up that little safe there where the cigarettes are behind. And there are not no more commercials, and I think
yeah,
that is the biggest one because we are so used to being bombarded with those messages of bad messages, I shall say. So I
totally.
think that is, but that has something to do with legislation. I mean, there's
Yeah.
so many parts to it.
There are. I'm glad you brought up cigarettes, because I think that's probably the best example that we have as a society of how that friction really worked. Like at least in many parts of the states, the cost of cigarettes has gone up dramatically over the past couple of decades, where they're taxed really high. So that is a form of friction where you're making it harder because people have to spend more money to get them. Same thing with the warnings. I think every cigarette carton in the States has a call out that says this can cause cancer or something like that, that's a form of cognitive friction, because every time somebody is choosing to do that, you have to be confronted with the fact that you're making a choice that's actively harming you. So yeah, I think a lot of these principles are things that have been done successfully, but they just need to be applied elsewhere. And it's hard to wait on legislation because I think it's very slow and it's not always the most effective. That's why I just try to think, okay, what can you do as a company to help solve some of these problems?
And do you have some ideas how you can do it?
Yeah, I do have some ideas, and those are the things that we're working on right now. I think one of the biggest things is the cost. Like the reason that soda and yeah, really soda and a lot of the processed food products is because the cost of the ingredients are so low. A lot of them
Mhm.
are ingredients that are subsidized by the US government. So that makes them very cheap for companies to use. And if they're very cheap, that means that a lot of people are probably going to purchase it. Like I think soda in some places is actually cheaper to buy than water, which seems so backwards.
I
But
know.
the high fructose corn syrup that's used in many US products is it's artificially cheap because the US government buys a lot of corn in order to keep the price low. So really it starts I think on the cost side of things because a lot of people I think their number one kind of objection to like eating healthier is like well it costs more to eat
Hmm.
healthier. It's too expensive to eat healthier. And if you can remove that then I think you remove one of the biggest objections and the biggest barriers that people have to eating healthier.
It goes back to education, and
Mhm.
it goes back to a voice that needs to be louder and bigger to get to Congress. At the end, we as consumers have the power, but most people don't even realize that. And of course, it's kind of a fantasy if you so will to think about, hey, we are millions of people. If everybody says, no, I'm making taking that example of soda. I do not buy soda anymore. The companies would have to change something. But of course, it's kind of a wishful thinking at this point. But hopefully, there is something we can do, and maybe you are the first one who get the train started.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And I actually, in another conversation, just had the same thing where companies, they survive on cash flow and consumers are the ones that give them that cash flow. So to your example, if all consumers just collectively decided tomorrow that, hey, we're going to stop buying this, that the cash going into the company would dry up and the company would eventually collapse unless they change something. And it's funny, you can actually see that Coca-Cola is doing this right now. They have recently, again, I'm not sure what it's like in international markets, but Coke Zero has become the main product that they push in the US because US consumers are rejecting Coke Classic because it's so filled with sugar. So instead, because people have stopped giving them money for that, they basically change their offering or the one that they kind of push because they want to stay in business. And so they created something else. So in that sense, yeah, consumers, it's kind of backwards and counterintuitive because you think that these big companies have all this power, but really those companies derive their power from the consumers that they serve.
Yeah. And again, you just have to educate people more. Talking about consumers and customer service, especially at the very beginning, customer service was very important to you and you were responding to that. Can you tell us just a little bit about that part of your company, how customer service is another important part of gaining valuable and loyal customers?
Yeah, absolutely. Every customer in the beginning, for the first couple of years, I responded to every message. I have had, I don't even know how many calls, dozens, maybe hundreds of phone calls with customers over the years where I'll talk to them. And it's very helpful to do because otherwise they're just almost like numbers on a spreadsheet. So when you have a conversation with them, when you talk with them, you really understand who these people are and you understand why, when they have so many choices, why do they choose to spend their hard earned money with the product that you created? What is it about the product that you created that they are attached to? And understanding that is really critical because if you can understand, like, okay, I've talked to 10 people and they all have told me the same thing, that this specific reason is why they love the product, then it seems like this is what I should really be focused on communicating to others, because this seems to be what people love about the product. So it's really helpful, going back to what I said a second ago about how all companies derive their power from the consumers that they serve. That we're no different. We serve our consumers, and so if you don't have that dialogue with your consumers, I think you're really doing yourself a disservice, because you need to know what your consumers want and who they are,
Mhm.
and that's really helped us. It's really helped us over the years.
So, if the consumer is really the one who can make a difference, you distribute the bars into stores, right? Like health food stores, or what are the stores where people can buy?
Right now, the majority we sell is directly to consumers, either through our site or through Amazon. And I prefer that, because I think it's better for the consumer, because we just have that direct relationship with you. We can send you the product directly, as opposed to, if you do go through stores, it's another great way to reach customers, but it goes through many other people in order to get there. And so you lose that relationship with the consumer, but it usually ends up being a higher price for the consumer too, because there's so many more people involved.
If people want to try it, you said they can order it directly from your website.
Yeah, they can order from our website. I will say that ordering from Amazon is probably going to be the fastest way to get them, because it's hard for us to do 1 or 2 day shipping. But you can order from atlasbars.com, or if you search on Amazon for Atlas Bars. Our top flavor is the peanut butter chocolate chip. It's a hard flavor to beat. Yeah. So yeah, those are really the spots that most people get them.
Good. What other flavors do you have?
We are actually coming out with a new flavor next week that I can't yet say, and I have another one that I'm looking at right in front of me that's going to be a new flavor. We also have dark chocolate almond, which is almond butter based with cocoa mixed in, and then we have a almond butter chocolate chip, which is almond butter based with chocolate chips and is more like vanilla tones to it. So 3 flavors. We're about to come out with a fourth, and then we have another one coming soon.
Ooh, I can't wait to taste those. Now, before I let you go, I just wanted to see if you can share with our listeners like a small ritual or habit that you have, perhaps meditating, hiking, that helps you recharge.
Yeah. The one that I've been doing most recently is actually riding a Vespa. Yeah. I've done long distance running. I've done skiing for most of my life. And the feeling that I think you get, like the runner's high, it's very similar to the feeling that I get when I'm riding around on the Vespa, where it's almost like what I would call like a flow state, because you can't be doing anything else. You can't be on your phone. You have to be completely locked into what you're doing, because if you are distracted, it's extremely dangerous. So when I do that, I feel extremely light, and I just process information just kind of in the background in a way that I don't do elsewhere in life. So that's been my most recent one. I've been loving doing it, but I've tried out different things over the years.
Well, what you said, if you love it, if you do something that you enjoy, that's a number one. And it doesn't matter what it is, it's different for everybody. I like to walk, and that walking out in nature, oftentimes without any devices. Sometimes I do have my phone with me, because sometimes I have ideas and I'm just talking just to capture those
Yeah.
ideas when they come. Looking ahead, what are the next major milestone for Atlas? You already mentioned the product. Do you have any other things in the making?
Yes, we have a couple of other things. So right now we just have bars, but there are at least 2 other product lines that we're working on. So not bars, we have additional bar flavors, but in addition to that, we have completely new products that we're looking to come out with. So that's something that I'm excited for. That's in the near future. I would say the next 6 to 12 months. And then we're also running a clinical study with our product, which not many food companies do. We're
Hmm.
running that right now, so we should have the results from that by the end of this month. And we're also going to be evolving our positioning, like how we talk about the brands, in the next couple of months to a place that's pretty unique. And that again, I don't really know of any other brand that's done this, but it's really based in science and nutrition and what we've been talking about on this in this conversation about just creating products and food that helps people.
So, if you could leave someone who's listening, maybe is a young adult just finishing college, right? Or maybe it is someone who's already been in the profession but just wants to make changes. What would be your biggest or your piece of advice you would give someone who wants to try something?
Something that was very helpful for me was thinking about the following, which is that the pain of regret is almost always worse than the pain of trying. So, what I mean is that for me, not doing something and then regretting it hurts way more than if I try something and I fail. And yes, you have the embarrassment or shame, whatever, of failing, but that's temporary. The regret is something that just eats away at you. So I'm very afraid of regret, and I've used that kind of framework to propel a lot of my decisions.
I like that you just shared that because this is so true. So often we've heard from people who are laying on their deathbed and just saying, "I wish I have risked more. I wish I would have followed my own advice." And what I shared with you at the beginning of our conversation, when I changed from being a claim adjuster to starting my career as an actress, going to acting school. And my parents and friends said, "Oh, don't do this. This, you will never make money. And this profession is just so shady, what can be shady, whatever, and the scandals." And eventually I said to them, "Look, I don't want to look back 40 years from now and telling myself, why didn't you at least give it a try?" And that was really one of the things that shut them up, and even for me to just move forward. And I did, and after 2 weeks being in acting school, I knew that this is what I wanted to do for the rest of my life.
That's an awesome takeaway. And yeah, you if you hadn't, you would have always been wondering what if.
What if exactly? So everybody listening, just follow your passion, serve from the heart. That is my tagline that I always leave people when I do any recordings, because that's how I lived my whole life, serving from the heart. And that's obviously what you are doing, and you followed your passion, and then you can live the life you imagine and have that freedom. James, it was such a delightful conversation, and you shared so many wonderful insights. I truly appreciated that you're here and shared your experiences, insights, and knowledge that you have with my community.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much for the space to have the conversation, and I enjoyed it equally, probably more so. Yeah, just a true delight speaking. So thank you.